Okay, so what we are going to do today is actually class and class struggle. In that, what I'll do is I'll start with what do you mean by class, and then he is also discussing about some important concepts that will be asked in exam. Class in itself and class for itself. I'll explain that concept. Okay, then we'll see types of class. What are the different types of class Marx is talking about? Okay, then he has introduced a concept, class polarization. We will see that concept also. Then after that, he is talking about consciousness, which is developed in a class. Okay, we'll also talk about true consciousness and false consciousness. Then we will move on to class struggle. So the first part of the theory is class. So understanding class is more important there. So we'll understand class, types of class, all these things will be done, and then we'll move on to class struggle. In class struggle, we will start with causes of class struggle. There will be three important causes of class struggle. Then we will talk about the process in which the class struggle is going on. Okay. What do you mean by class? Already you have some idea about it. Class means a person's position in the production process. So if you're working somewhere, your position in that particular company, like you're calling as you are called as supervisor, manager, capitalist, entrepreneur, or the worker, all these are classes. So class means, in simple language, your position in the production process, the person's position in the production process. Now what Marx says is, normally you are born in classes. Your class is basically understood in terms of your father's class or your parents' class. Okay, so just as a man cannot choose who is to be his father, you don't have any choice with respect to your class also. You cannot choose your class. Okay, this is what Marx says. Now after that, this is an objective criteria. So your position in the production process is basically based on objective criteria. What is that? Your position. It's all about that role that you're performing in the production process. And this objective criteria based on which the understanding of class is what Marx called as class in itself. So class in itself is basically based on an objective criteria. That means it is a simple definition of class. That's it. After that, he is also talking about the class which develops some consciousness. Now you belongs to workers class. So workers are exploited by the capitalist. So you belongs to the particular class and you're aware about the common problem and you try to unite to change the entire setup. Okay, so this is a class which develops some consciousness. Okay, it can be true consciousness, it can be false consciousness, that we'll discuss later. What do you mean by true consciousness? What do you mean by false consciousness? Okay, the mobilization of people when they are aware about their common problems, it is understood by using a subjective criteria. That means a particular class develops some consciousness. Okay, so based on subjective criteria, now class 4 itself will come into existence. Class 4 itself is going to fight for the entire class to change their situations. And this is actually happening in when we discussed about ancient mode of production, slaves are revolting. It is actually a class for itself, but it is based on false consciousness because they are not able to change their situation. Only the mode of production has changed. Then in feudal mode of production, when the serfs are revolting, still it is based on false consciousness despite the fact that class 4 itself is there, because they are not able to change their situation. But in capitalist mode of production, now there is no alternate mode of productions are coming, so they unite with appropriate system of ideas, proper leadership, proper organization, that is based on true consciousness. Okay, so this is what about class. So we understood what is class, person's position in the production process. Class in itself, which is based on an objective criteria. Class 4 itself, which is based on a subjective criteria. You also understood what I mean by true consciousness and false consciousness. Okay. Now, next part is actually types of class. Marx is broadly talking about haves and have-nots, upper class and lower class. Or in particular capitalist society, if you see, capitalist and worker or bourgeois or proletariat. In ancient society or the slave society, you have seen masters and slaves. In feudal society, you have seen lords and serfs. Okay, now in capitalist society, capitalist and worker. So broadly, he is talking about two classes, haves and have-nots, or upper class and lower class. But in some of the books, I'll make you to write what is that. The revolution and counter-revolution in Germany, he's talking about some 8 classes. Class struggle in France is talking about some 6 classes. So basically Marx is talking about some intermediate classes also. Marx is also referring to some classes like petit bourgeois, lumpen proletariat, etc. Petit bourgeois means the traders, business, some small scale business people, not that level of capitalist, not large big capitalist, some small traders, etc. And lumpen proletariat means they are the poorest of the poor, that category. Okay, so what I want to tell you is, even though we are understanding the types of class in terms of haves and have-nots, Marx is also talking about some intermediate classes. But what Marx says is, With time, these intermediate classes will be polarized into two groups, haves and have-nots. Okay, this is what going to happen. So this is how the triangular structure is actually used to explain. Upper class will be at the top because they are limited, lower class will be at the bottom because they are huge in number, and there will be some intermediate class here. With time, this intermediate class will either move to upper class or will move to lower class. If you are moving to upper class, that process is known as bourgeoisization. Okay, so through the process of bourgeoisization, and if you are coming to lower class, that process is known as proletarianization. Okay, so the class polarization, this is in common, in general it is known as class polarization. So class polarization means the intermediate classes will be polarized into any of the two, upper class or lower class, through the process of bourgeoisization and proletarianization. Okay, so class polarization is done. Now this is one of the most important criticism of Marx. What Marx says, middle class will not be there for a long time, polarization will happen. Is that the case now? No, middle class is very strong. So Weber criticized like this: instead of triangular structure, a diamond structure or a hexagonal structure would be better to understand the current society where the middle class is actually widening rather than, you know, polarizing. So class polarization never happened. So that is one of the most important criticism. When we discuss about critical analysis, I'll tell you all those things, okay? But here, just have an idea, Marx is talking about class polarization, but that have never came into existence because that is not going to happen. Middle class, instead of polarizing, it has widened, okay? And this criticism you can use. So that's about class. You understood class. Class is a person's position in the production process. Class in itself, class for itself, okay, true consciousness, false consciousness, and then types of class, haves and have-nots, class polarization, bourgeoisization, proletarianization. These are some basic concepts related to this theory. Now we'll move on to class struggle. The second part, okay? Class and class struggle is the theory. So second part is class struggle. We need to know the reasons of class struggle. Marx is actually talking about three important reasons. The first reason is, see, with time, there will be quantitative changes in society over a period of time. I have already discussed nature imposed restrictions, but men will always try to overcome those restrictions through continuous modifications in the way you produce things. The way you produce things means basically on the forces of production. So you keep on improving the tools, techniques, etc. Okay, so forces of production change, automatically relations of production also have to change. Yesterday we have discussed this, right? Why relations has to be changed? Because earlier you were using some force of production, so who are the owners of that force of production? You were in connection with that person. Now there is an advancement in technology, so the people who's having the better tools and techniques, you will have connection with that person if you need to undertake production process and if you are looking for efficiency and all those things, right? So when the forces of production changes, the relations will also change. So what will happen? The existing relation and the new relation will come into conflict. If you see, when you go to railway station, if you call an Uber taxi, something like that, that is a new method, right? So that is a kind of new force of production which is friendly to the customer, but actually the existing taxi drivers will come into conflict with the new people. So the force of production changing, or the way you produce things are changing, so you need different relation, but the existing relation and the new relation will come into conflict. That is one of the reasons for class struggle. Second reason for class struggle is because always there is an antagonistic relation between two classes, haves and have-nots. Antagonistic cooperation. They are cooperating, masters and slaves are cooperating, but there is an antagonistic cooperation. Their interests are contradictory. Feudal lords and serfs, they are in cooperation, but again antagonistic cooperation. Capitalist and worker, they are again cooperating, but it is a antagonistic cooperation. The capitalist interest is different, the worker's interest is different. Capitalists want to make more money, want more time for the workers, but workers want to get more wages and less time to work and better working condition and all those things, right? So the interests are basically contradictory in every system between two classes. So this antagonistic cooperation will result into conflict. So two reasons we have done. Third reason is alienation. Alienation means you are estranged, the estrangement, or you are like a stranger, and if you are losing creativity, you are alienated. This we will discuss in much more detail in the next theory. Next theory is alienation, so I'll discuss there, okay? So alienation literally means estrangement from group of people or some situation. Otherwise, what Marx talking about alienation is actually, you see something in society, if you cannot express that as your own creativity, you are alienated. We'll discuss this more in detail in the next theory, so that we'll understand. And we'll discuss the level of alienation, types of alienation in different society, and everything we'll discuss, okay? So these are three causes. When the force of production change, relation of production change, so existing relation and the new relation will come into a conflict. Second reason, the antagonistic operation between two broad classes which is existing, okay? Third, alienation. So three causes I've done. Now the most important part is the process of class struggle, how it is happening. See, exactly the same thing that we have discussed in mode of production, feudal, ancient mode of production, feudal mode of production, capitalist mode of production, socialism, everything we are going to discuss. But here what we need to see is how that struggle happens. How is it operating? You know what is primitive communism, what is ancient mode of production, everything that we have discussed, right? So in ancient mode of production, what I've told you is, when the exploitation of slaves reaches at its peak, when the mature condition exists, slaves will revolt. Now this revolt is, how is it happening is what you need to understand now. It's like this. See, the masters, this is, let's say, slaves, okay? And masters here, okay? Now during this time, so settled agriculture emerges. I told you that, okay? So there is an emerging class among the masters. They are related to settled agriculture. So they are the representative of settled agriculture. So what happens is, there is a struggle between masters and slaves. This is actually aided and supported by this emerging class who are part of masters itself. Because they don't want the existing mode of production, they want a changed mode of production that is related to settled agriculture. So they want the slaves to be freed from the masters. So that's why they are aiding this conflict, okay? So that is what I told you. This emerging class, they become the feudal lords after this, in the next mode of production, but the slaves remains as serfs, okay? So their condition actually not changed. What changed is actually the way you produce things. The mode of production has been changed, but the condition is not changing. So you can see here there is a class for itself, because slaves are emerged, slaves came together and they're fighting. But is it based on false consciousness or true consciousness? That is the question. It is based on false consciousness, because they are not able to change their conditions. The situation is not able to change, okay? So this is based on false consciousness, despite the fact that class 4 itself came into existence here, okay? Now again, in this mode of production, what happens is, among this there will be an emerging class. In feudal mode of production, there will be an emerging class who are related to factory system, okay? These are the agents of factory system, okay? Now factory system means the agents of capitalists. So basically they want people to be freed from land, and feudalism want people to be tied in the land. So you want free labor now. So this people, the emerging class, now aiding the revolt against serfs and lords. When the mature condition exists, serfs will revolt against lords, feudal lords, and who's supporting it? The emerging class from the lords itself. Eventually they became whom? Capitalists in the new mode of production, and serfs becoming workers. Are they able to change their situation? No, but they are changing the mode of production. So is it based on false consciousness or true consciousness? False consciousness again, okay? So in the class, even though class 4 itself came into existence in ancient mode of production and in feudal mode of production, but it was based on false consciousness, as they were not able to change their situation. All what they can do is, they are only changing the way you produce things or the mode of production. Clear, no? Understood, okay? Now in this, now there is no new alternate mode of production is coming, no new emerging classes are coming. So workers are energized by appropriate system of ideology. They are aware about their common problem, they have a proper leadership, proper organization, proper ideology. Now they fight against the capitalist and they capture everything, and there will be only one class, that is the workers class. Okay, now there is no two classes, haves and have-nots is not there, only workers. And there is a intermediate stage, there is a transitional stage which will eventually end in communism, where there won't be any classes, there won't be any state or anything, okay? So that is based on true consciousness. So this is how class struggle operate. So we have discussed about what is class, person's position in production process, class in itself, objective criteria, class for itself, subjective criteria. Then we have discussed about the types of class, haves and have-nots, upper class, lower class, bourgeois proletariat, okay, capitalist worker, master slave, feudal lords and serfs, basically haves and have-nots. There may be intermediate classes, but class polarization happens through proletarianization or bourgeoisization. Okay, then we have discussed about the reasons for class struggle, and we have understood 3 reasons. First reason is, if the force of production change, relations will change, so old relation and the new relation will come into a conflict. Second reason is antagonistic cooperation. The two classes, the two broad classes, are always in an antagonistic cooperation that result into conflict because their interests are contradictory. Third reason is alienation, and how it is operating we have just seen now in this diagram. That's it. So we'll write now. Right.
But this is alienation.
Alienation where?
Okay. Method of class struggle.
No. How class struggle operates. Okay, right. Understanding of class occupies a central position in Marx's systemic view of society. In Marx's systemic view of society. Okay? Systemic view of society. Write fast. Man means, when you're writing means you need to write fast now. Warm up. Man enters into relation with others. Man enters into relation with others for the satisfaction of needs through production. These relations place individuals in different positions creating abstract strata-like formation. Abstract strata-like formation. These stratas are termed as classes. These stratas are termed as classes. So what this paragraph all about? Man enters into relation of production to undertake production. So that relations will place you in different positions in the production process. That forms an abstract strata-like formation, and that's what you mean by class. In simple language, your position in the production process. According to Marx, men are born in societies where these relations have already been determined. These relations have already been determined. That is, by birth, men are born in classes. Born in classes. He states, inverted comma centralize, it's a statement. Just as a man cannot choose who is to be his father, so he has no choice to his class. He has no choice to his class. Okay. Marx, inverted comma close here. Marx frequently uses the term class. But He defines it scarcely. He defines it scarcely. In his later works, particularly Das Kapital, he defines class as a group of people sharing the same position in the process of production. In the process of production. This definition is based on an objective criteria pertaining to person's position in the broad property relation. Person's position in the broad property relation. What is that? Objective criteria. Marx termed this as class in itself. Class in itself. Okay. So objective criteria pertaining to person's position in the broad property relation. Marx terms this class as class in itself. Apart from this, in his other writings, Marx also uses a subjective criteria to define class. A subjective criteria to define class. He frequently refers to class for itself for the class which develops some consciousness. Consciousness inverted comma letter. Consciousness. Okay. The members of a particular class, when develop a consciousness of belonging to a same class, inverted comma letter, class for itself comes into existence. Class for itself, close it, comes into existence. Okay. For example, workers of the world unite. Workers of the world unite. Okay. Now we'll write, so what we have done, we have discussed about what is class and class in itself, class for itself based on subjective and objective criteria, that is clear. I will write what are the types of class, haves, have-nots, class polarization, everything will write here, just write. Marx broadly defines two types of classes in every society, that is haves and have-nots. Haves and have-nots. Okay, who's dominant here? Haves are dominant, so right, haves occupy the dominant position in terms of power, comma, status, and economic resources. Whereas have-nots are subordinates. Have-nots are subordinates. Okay. For example, in ancient society, masters are haves and slaves are have-nots. Feudal society engana?
Feudal lords.
In feudal society, landlords are haves. Landlords are haves. And serfs are have-nots. Now you can write capitalist society also there, workers and capitalist or bourgeois proletariat. If you want, you can mention it in a table also, haves, have-nots table, okay? Apart from this, in books like inverted comma, Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Germany, Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Germany, and Class Struggle in France. Where? Class Struggle in France. Marx mention other intermediate classes also. Marx mention other intermediate classes also. For example, he talks of 8 classes in the former book. Eda Germany la, okay? 8 classes in the former book and 6 classes in the latter. Similarly, there are references to other classes like petty bourgeois, comma, petty bourgeois is traders, etc. Marginal lumpen proletariat means poorest of poor, okay, that particular group. Okay. In spite of all these variations, Marx opines that with time, all intermediate classes will be absorbed into two poles, that is haves and have-nots. Through a process of class polarization. Okay, this process involves bourgeoisization and proletarianization. Marginal diagram varacho triangle shape, triangle model upper class, third lower class. You can show arrow. Bourgeoisization to the top, proletarianization to the bottom. Okay. Thus, during the course of history, within a particular society, within a particular society, as the exploitation increases, class polarization will take place. Class polarization will take place. Okay. The idea of polarization and transformation of class in itself to class for itself introduces an element of dynamism in Marxian class analysis.
Marxian class?
Analysis. The dynamism is understood through the concept of consciousness, which is generated by the material condition. In the context of capitalism, Marx states that the inevitability of monopolies exploitation of the consumers and workers, both were exploited, no? Consumers by charging the high rate and workers by paying the low wages. Consumers and workers, frequent economic instances such as inflation, slums, and depression, absence of centralized planning will result in increasing consciousness of the masses. Okay. The state is controlled by the haves. And will work for the satisfaction of their interest These contradictions will generate consciousness among have-nots. The consciousness is understood at two levels. The consciousness is understood at two levels. One, false consciousness. Two, true consciousness. Now you write what is false consciousness. False consciousness. It is a consciousness that does not transcend. It is a consciousness that does not transcend. It is a consciousness that does not transcend, it's being rooted it's being rooted in an economically competitive mode of production. An economically competitive mode of production. In other words, the consciousness which is rooted in the social being had been referred as false consciousness by Marx. Okay, for example, workers are aware about their common problem. Workers are aware about their common problem, comma, workers demand more benefit, etc. Now you write true consciousness. According to Marx, when the economic conditions are ripe, a mature condition exists, when the economic conditions are ripe and when the workers are united by solidarity, economic conditions are ripe and when the workers are united by solidarity, and are energized by appropriate system of ideas which aims at transformation of the system for the benefit of all, true consciousness emerges. True consciousness emerges. Okay, these moments occur when the existing mode of production is played out, and Marx terms these moments are revolutionary. Okay, so class is done, types of class is done, class polarization is done, true consciousness is done, false consciousness is done. Now we will move on to class struggle, second part. Give a heading, class struggle. So here the first part will be the reasons or the causes of class struggle. 3 reasons we'll write. Then we'll talk about how it is operating. Okay, the process of class struggle. So now give a heading, class struggle. According to Marx, people are woven into relations of production. People are woven into relations of production, which involves inverted comma antagonistic cooperation. അറിയാലോ എന്താണെന്ന് antagonistic cooperation. In each mode of production, each MOP എന്ന് എഴുതിയാൽ മതി. Okay, write it completely. In each mode of production, two classes enter into a struggle / antagonism / conflict. So class struggle, if it is asked, or class antagonism or class conflict, all are the same, okay? Which keeps on increasing? Which keeps on increasing? The process of this class struggle is not smooth. The process of this class struggle is not smooth and is mediated by number of factors. In his books like Preface to Communist Manifesto, Preface to Communist inverted comma ledana, Preface to Communist Manifesto, comma, Class Struggle in France. He defines class struggle. At the paragraph, the process of class struggle is, now we'll write 1, 2, 3 reasons, okay? So the first reason, 1 you can write, you can put 1 and you can write 1. Due to change in forces of production. What will happen now? Change in force of production? Relations will change. Then? Conflict between? New and old, okay? So due to change in forces of production, new relations of productions are essential. New relations of, due to change in force of production, continuation at either. New relations of production are essential. These new relations of production comes into conflict with the existing relation and thereby initiating class struggle. For example, in feudal system, the factories emerged, but the work is compatible with feudal way of life. Work is compatible with the feudal way of life. With the feudal way of life. Factories require free labor. Whereas feudalism require people to be tied on land. Okay, understood now? The second one. According to Marx, there is inherent contradiction between haves and have-nots. Haves and have-nots. Okay? That is, their interests are conflicting. For example, capitalist tries to maximize its profit, whereas labor tries to maximize wages. Which is contradictory. Okay, now the third reason, what is that?
Alienation.
Alienation. Third one, Marx also explained class struggle. Marx also explained class struggle in terms of alienation. In terms of alienation, which reaches at its peak in capitalism. Which reaches at its peak in capitalism. Okay, the productive forces constrain the worker in such a manner, constrain the worker in such a manner that he is unable to express his creativity. He is unable to express his creativity. Man is a creative humanism, so if you cannot find any object in society as your own creativity, you are alienated. We'll discuss that in detail later, okay? Worker is detached from his work. Worker is detached from his work and in the end from his own self. And in the end from his own self. Thus, alienation for Marx is the most fundamental force behind the rise of consciousness and the class struggle. And class struggle. Okay, so we have discussed about the three reasons for class struggle. Now, mechanism of class struggle. Give a heading, mechanism of class struggle. Throughout the history, in different modes of production, throughout the history, in different modes of production, the mechanism of class struggle differs. The mechanism of class struggle differs. Okay? During ancient mode of production, slaves launched a struggle. Slaves launched a struggle against masters. So who was supporting it? The emerging class who was related to settled agriculture. So just write there, diagram you can draw later, okay? I've made the diagram before, so exactly the same diagram you can write. Now write, slaves are aided by the emerging class, who are the representative of new forces of production, new FOP, new forces of production relating to settled agriculture. Okay, so leave some space so that you can draw the diagram. These emerging class constitute of masters who are pioneers of new mode of production. Okay? Thus, actually, slave struggles are based on false consciousness and eventually satisfies the interest of the emerging class. the interest of the emerging class. Similarly, in feudal mode of production, the serf revolution was aided by the emerging class, relating to the factory system, as factories require free labor, and the serfs had to be freed from the lands, which in turn meant playing out of feudal mode of production. Okay, thus the serf revolution is also based on false consciousness. Why? Because they are not able to change their situation. The only changes the way you produce things. False consciousness. In the capitalist mode of production, workers do not have any alternative. Okay? Any alternative. No new alternative forces of production were emerging in 19th century. Okay, workers' exploitation and alienation reaches at its peak, guided by an appropriate ideology. Workers' revolution will be based on true consciousness. Okay, so previous two were false consciousness, now based on true consciousness. So they were able to change their situation. Now there is only one class, there is no exploitation. Okay, this revolution according to Marx is the true revolution. Thus he states, inverted comma the statement aana, history repeat itself, first as tragedy, second as farce, FARC. കേട്ടിട്ടില്ല സ്റ്റേറ്റ്മെന്റ്? അടുത്ത സെൻറ്റൻസ്, അടുത്ത പാരഗ്രാഫ്. Workers' revolution will result in the establishment of socialist mode of production, where workers controls power, and there will be only one class, there will be no class struggle. There is no need to have any struggle now. There will be no class struggle. Thus Marx states, inverted comma the history of hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. Is the history of class struggle. Inverted comma close here. அடுத்த statement read the class struggle act as the motor of history. Class struggle act as the motor of history. So it is a class struggle which keeps on changing the society or history. Okay, motor. തിരിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുന്നു. Full stop. Close ചെയ്ത inverted comma. Class struggle act as motor of history. Okay, അടുത്തത് paragraph. Thus, Marx assumes the struggle between classes is the fundamental condition of social change. Is the fundamental condition of social change. Okay, the struggle aims at resolving the contradiction present in the society. Alle? So what is the essential condition for social change? It is a class struggle. So without class struggle, there won't be any social change. Okay, so that is the fundamental condition of history and society. And why struggle? Struggle is basically to resolve the contradictions in the society. Okay. While talking of change, Marx differentiate between gradual quantitative changes and a sudden qualitative change. Quantitative change in the within mode of production, some changes are happening, the advancements in technology, etc. That is quantitative change. Qualitative change in the all of a sudden there will be a change. But the quantitative will be a gradual change, that is a change in the system. Qualitative change will be a sudden change, that is a change of the system. Change in society is quantitative, change of society is qualitative. The mode of production is changing, that is qualitative. But advancement in technology, that is quantitative. Gradual change is quantitative, sudden change is qualitative, right? The class struggle keeps on increasing. Within a particular mode of production. Due to gradual quantitative changes, like forces of production, increase in exploitation, etc. Okay, that is gradual changes, right? Just underline gradual changes. The sudden qualitative change occurs. Because of revolution, which is the culmination of class struggle. Okay, revolution only occur when mature conditions are present. The revolution is possible only if there is an appropriate network of communication there is an appropriate network of communication between workers and the leaders. Network of communication between workers and leaders, comma. So communication is important, right? Comma. Critical mass of workers having true consciousness, comma, clear perception of a common enemy, comma, appropriate organization and an ideology. Okay? Or line order. In another text, Marx also takes into consideration the geographical and cultural conditions playing important role in revolution. Okay? Important role in revolution. That's it. That's about class and class struggle. So, what is class? Person's position in production process. Objective criteria, subjective criteria, class in itself, class for itself, types of class, haves and have-nots, upper class, lower class, capitalist, worker, bourgeois, proletariat, master, slave, feudal lords and serfs, etc. Okay. Then we have discussed about class polarization, bourgeoisization, proletarianization. We talked about true consciousness, false consciousness, the three reasons for class struggle and the process in which class struggle is operating. And finally, what is quantitative change, what is qualitative change. Class struggle act as a motor of history. History of hitherto existing society is the history of class struggle. History repeats itself first as tragedy, second as farce. Okay, all these are to be there in your answer. Finally, Marx also acknowledges geographical and cultural factors also in class struggle, not only economic conditions, but predominantly what is the prime importance? Economic conditions and the antagonistic cooperation in the production process. Done? We'll do alienation next day. Okay.